The growing trend in sports nutrition is that every athlete's body is unique. At the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, we are working to help athletes and their influencers better understand these differences so they can better fuel their bodies. GSSI has a variety of tools to accomplish this, from testing the unique attributes of each athlete to nutrition personalization programs and educational outreach. GSSI is striving to make sure athletes and their influencers are more informed about their nutritional needs than ever before. GSSI is also an educational resource for sports health professionals, athletic trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, registered dietitians and sports scientists all turn to GSSI to gain insights into the latest research and strategies that they can put to use with their own athletes. Whether it's in the lab or on the field, online or offline, GSSI is giving athletes and their influencers an invaluable look at how nutrition and hydration can change their game, help them reach their goals, and become the best they can be.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Gatorade Sports Science Institute Webinar Series 2021. My name is Chicky Reyes, and I'll be your moderator for the rest of the afternoon. And I hope all of you are doing okay, staying safe and healthy wherever you are right now. Okay, I am very excited. We are very excited because we have such a great topic to tackle. Something that's been very popular. Okay, the past few months or the past year, it has picked up. The popularity has picked up, and we're excited to discuss this nice activity with all of you. But before we get into that, I would like to refresh your respective memories, okay, on what GSSI is and what this webinar series is all about. So allow me to walk you through a couple of slides here, okay? So GSSI started as Gatorade Exercise Physiology Lab way back in 1985 before it became the Gatorade Sports Science Institute that we know today. And GSSI's long-standing mission is to help athletes and sports enthusiasts globally, all right, optimize their health and performance through research and education in hydration and nutrition science. Now, bringing sports science beyond the lab, GSSI aims to continuously find innovative ways to spread the science of hydration and nutrition to coaches, who else? Nutritionists, athletes, and sports communities the world over. And so, in an effort to reach more sports enthusiasts despite obvious limitations, here we are today in the Gatorade Philippines Facebook Live as GSSI launches a second series of webinars focused on sports-specific topics led by our scientists and experts. Now, speaking of sports communities, today's topic is about a sport, as I mentioned earlier, that grew into bigger communities of its own since this pandemic, all right? And I'm talking about the beautiful sport of cycling. And GSSI would like to be of aid to cyclists who have recently started their ride into this sport. We call it ride into this sport, all right? By imparting relevant information on training, nutrition, hydration, and much more, so that you guys will have fun times when you start pedaling on that bicycle again, okay? So for today, allow me to share with you the lineup, our lineup of what will go through the whole afternoon. Okay, number one, physical assessment, the right fit, conditioning and strengthening, digital tools, etc., right? We will have Coach Sol Anthony Sibayan who will be discussing that. Number two, sports nutrition recommendations for cyclists. You might say, Chicky, I'm just a newbie. This is for you. You know, I just picked up the sport of cycling. This is for you. And we have no other than Dr. Rebecca Randall to help us go through that, the second part. Number three, we'd like to hear from you guys. Okay, join us in some Q&A with our speakers. You can ask your questions, and we'll love to answer them live on this Facebook show of ours. And then Number four, open discussion with our guest panelists. Okay, we have Nico Huelgas and Ea Laure who'll be joining us later on in the afternoon. Okay, so with that, we invite all of you to send your questions regarding these topics by providing comments down below. Okay, down below. There you go. And would be glad to discuss these questions, ask these questions to our speakers during our Q&A and open discussion portion. And check this out. Selected questions will receive special Gatorade prizes. I thought these were mine, but these are going to be yours, okay? The bike bottle. Chosen questions will either receive the bike bottle, socks, beautiful socks, Gatorade, partnered with Vamos. I'm telling you, it's beautiful. And my personal favorite, the Gatorade backpack. Multiple pockets. If you guys are looking for a nice adventure trip, this is what you need. You can even put your favorite Gatorade bottle here. Okay? So ask away, type away in that comment section down there, comment box down there. And for those of you who'd like to receive certificate of attendance, please make sure you stay with us until the end of the show so you can register for that certificate of attendance. Just to give you a tip, at the end of the show, the live show will show a QR code. I'll tell you more about that later on, and you have to scan that code. But if you don't watch the whole show and you don't see the QR code and you plan to watch later on, after the live telecast, unfortunately, you won't see that QR code. So if you want to get that certificate, stay with us until the end of the live show. I'll flash that QR code later on, and you can scan it and get that certificate of attendance and get these nice prizes. All you got to do is ask great questions and we'll choose them. Okay, our team in the back end will choose them. Okay, so here we go. Without any further ado, let's start with our first topic as we get to know our speaker, who is a former competitive cyclist and has been into endurance sports, mainly cycling, for the past 18 years and has been a coach since 2009. He is also the co-founder of Performance Testing Center Endurance Lab PH. I love that group of his. A former tenured academe in the Sports Science Department of the University of Santo Tomas and is currently the managing director of Algaria Cycling, a Qatar-based community and store for cycling enthusiasts and triathletes. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome. We call him a top cyclist here in the country. One of my favorite coaches in this sport, Coach Sol Sibayan. Woohoo! Hello, Coach.
Hi, Chicky. Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me here in this wonderful webinar. So, as you know, my topic today is beginner's guide to cycling. Okay, next slide, please. And I will be discussing with you today how to get the right size, getting the right fit, the right bike size, the right saddle height. Okay, number two is safety. What's the right helmet? Okay, you have different ratings for that and the sizes for that. And of course, very important to be seen on the road. So you have to know the proper hand signals while cycling around the city. Okay, and lastly, of course, you want to get into the sport, you want to train more and to get fitter, okay, and maybe join races and a couple of Grand Fondos. So I'll be discussing training progressions. Next. Okay, so this is very important because each bicycle has a different size. Okay, so first off is getting your inseam. So for example, you have this book, okay, and then you go to a wall and place the book in between your legs all the way to the groin area, and you can either ask someone to get a measuring tape or okay, use a meter stick or something to measure your inseam length. Okay, and that inseam length is very important to really get your proper saddle height. So I'll share that in the next slide. But here is also another thing to get the right size is to hop on the bike and check if there's clearance from your inseam into the top tube of the bike. Okay, so we call it your standover height. So if the bike, if you cannot touch the ground properly, okay, or while on the bike, then that bike for you is too big, okay, or it's not the right size for you. Okay, next slide. So if you have gotten the inseam, okay, from that book, okay, measurement, and you can now get the proper saddle height. Okay, so there are many formulas out there, but one of the famous one is the 109%. So for example, my inseam is 700 millimeters, for example, and I multiply it by 1.09 or 109%. Okay, so that's with Hamley. Or another one by Gregor et al. At 106 to 109. So I still get that 700 millimeter measurement, and I multiply it by 1.06 or multiply it by 1.09. So I get that range. Okay. Okay, so that's the measurement. As you can see here with my good friend Rudy Katindig of Tritech Bike Fit Lab, is he's measuring the top of the saddle, okay, all the way down. Okay, so this is another technique, and he's using lasers and fancy tools to really dial in a person's bike. Okay, so another is, of course, you can have a 3D motion camera and get 25 to 35 degrees of knee angle. That's gonna be at the bottom dead center, or when the pedal, like here in the picture, is at the lowest end. Okay, so the 109 measurement is from the top of the saddle all the way to the center of the pedal. Next slide, please. So there are other things to consider to get fitted on a bicycle. So of course, a disclaimer: it's best to consult a coach or a bike fitter to check if the bike is gonna be good for you. Okay, what's the reach of the frame? How long is the? This is number one. Okay, how long is the frame? Second is, of course, how long is the stem? Okay, or the handle post. Okay, and of course, there are different handlebars out there that have different dimensions. So if you really want to dial in that position, you best to consult those people. Okay. Now, choice of saddle. I have used hundreds of different saddles over the past few years, and there's always a certain shape that I like. Okay, so it's very personal. Okay, there are many technologies out there that measure how wide the hip bones are, but that's a good start. And then really getting in a bike fitting procedure and in a session and testing out different saddles. Okay, to know which shape and which one best fits you. Okay, and of course, lastly, again, there are other formulas in the market in the industry. Getting the inseam, and then there's a formula to get the right crank arm length. Okay, so different disciplines will require different crank arm lengths. So usually the industry standards around 170. Okay, small guys like I am would be running 165, or even as short as 145, and tall guys can run like 175 millimeters all the way to 185. So it really depends, and you want to be comfortable as much as possible. So getting the right crank arm length is very important for that. Okay, but usually different sizes, like the small ones, will have a shorter crank arm as compared to the bigger bikes. When you buy it, then definitely should have a longer crank arm. Next slide, please. Okay. So next is safety. So as you can see here, number one is wearing a helmet. Okay, it has saved me numerous times. I crashed in a race, and my helmet was like 1 week old, and it saved me. So at least I'm here with you now. Okay, so of course the proper helmet is important. Do not get the low end ones. I'd say check out the Virginia Tech helmet ratings, and the 5-star rating is of course the best one. And there's a score. The higher the score, the safer the helmet is. Okay. Another is of course lights. Okay, I have here lights that I use with my bike. Okay, and it's very important to be seen. So you have your headlight. If you're riding in the morning, you can use the pulsing type. Okay, and then of course at the rear it's gonna be red or yellow or blue, whatever you got, as long as you're making yourself visible. Okay, and of course lastly is your choice of apparel. As you can see here in the photo, when it's dark and you're wearing a black jersey, okay, it's very hard for motorists to see you. So it's nice to have um, a colorful jersey and with neon stripes or reflective, so that you will be able to be seen by motorists in the road. Okay, next slide. So the proper hand signal is very important, not only for riding in a group, but also for motorists. Okay, so one is, of course, you signal to the right if you're turning right, and then if you're having a issue with handling, okay, you can signal. If example signaling to the left, it's hard for you to hold the handlebar with your right hand, then maybe hold it with the left and then signal like this, you're turning to the left. Okay, and then the stop sign is sometimes like this, or okay, halt. Okay, slow down. Okay, you usually you place it on along the side and then give way for sometimes for cars or other bikers, cyclists along the road. Okay, especially when you're cycling in the groups, the people behind you won't be able to see the pothole, so it's very important to relay the message and pointing the pothole and road hazards along the route. Okay, so these are all gonna be helpful for you to get into the group riding scene, and get with friends and go around town or different cities across the country. Next slide, please. So let's move over to training progressions. Okay, so of course we talk about, or for example earlier, the bike fitting, right? So very important to get in tune with the bicycle. So that's gonna go under biomechanics. Okay, so getting your fitting addressed, okay, getting the right saddle height, reach, getting the right frame, okay, crank arm length are all gonna be under biomechanics or movement fundamentals. Next is of course the types of performance, so strength and conditioning. So you want to condition yourself, and I've seen people hitting the gym, and once they ride outside, they feel that they're so fit that they cannot cover the distance. So it's really specific, so it's a specific fitness. Okay, so cycling is also different. Even if you do cardio, like running, you might feel that you're not be able to transfer that much fitness from running to cycling. So it's really very specific. Okay, the movement patterns is gonna be different. Okay, next is gonna be exercise techniques and performance skills, and of course you need to know how to brake. Okay, um, especially if you're using it's your first time to wear clipless pedals. That's gonna be a skill, a new skill to learn. It's a fun skill to learn actually, and you're it's like a seatbelt actually in cycling that helps you if you example of a crash, you won't be moving more distance and give you more road rash, but actually it's a more uh, efficient way of pedaling with clipless as compared to just using running shoes. But of course, it's a good start. I mean, you can use flat pedals if you want. And then lastly is, of course, training principles, okay, which we will be discussing today. Next slide, please. So first off is Hal Selye's famous model of general adaptation syndrome, or GAS. Okay, so any start of a new stressor, like for example cycling, if it's your first time to ride the bike, then maybe the next day you might feel that your arms are sore, but you're not really moving, or maybe just because you're gripping the handlebars too much. So that's the first stressor, first time to use it. Okay, maybe your quads are killing you the next day, and etc. Okay, because it's a new thing that the body is trying to learn. Okay, is performing. So we call it the alarm phase. Okay, so like we call it DOMS, or delayed onset of muscle soreness. Okay, so that's the alarm phase. Eventually, the body will build up resistance, right, and it will adapt to that kind of stress. So eventually, it's gonna pick up. So we're gonna go with number two here. Okay, which is the resistance phase. Okay, the body is able to tolerate the stress, and you're getting more fitness in, and then eventually you're gonna super compensate. Your fitness is now higher than the baseline. Okay, so it's very important, guys, that you can be consistent. It's not a one-time thing that you train today and then tomorrow you're fitter. Okay, every day, like 30, 40 minutes, 1 hour, you do it slowly. It's gonna be a cumulative, and then eventually if you rest, and then you'll adapt and you'll have that super compensation. Now if you don't recover and just consistently train day in and day out, then you will you will actually enter this called overtraining phase, okay? Where the stress is too high and the body is not able to adapt and recover, and you'll actually dip your performance, maybe go back to baseline or even below to baseline where you started, and you're gonna feel that you might get sick, your immune system's gonna be down. So it's very important to balance the workouts with rest as well, which have a slide later. Okay, next slide, please. So there are three main things when you talk about cycling. I think cycling in general in the country and a majority in the globe right now with this global situation is going to be endurance. So there's three main things when you talk about cycling for long distances. So first one is VO2 max, second is threshold, and third and last is exercise economy. So let's discuss each one briefly. So first is VO2 max. Okay, how big the engine is. So for example, here is the Ferrari engine. The bigger the engine, the more powerful the engine is. But of course, you cannot really um, push that pedal all throughout because it's gonna run out of gas. So you're gonna go to the second one, which is threshold. Okay, so threshold is like your tachometer. It's like a limiter, and you don't want to, you know, push the effort close to the red. Okay, because if you push the effort close to the red line of a car, then the engine will blow up. Okay, so which is your VO2 max. Okay, so very important that you know that this is, for example, threshold's gonna be at around 7/10 effort. So if you're using by feel, that you know that 7/10 is gonna be my limit, my effort. If I'm gonna push at 7/10 for 1 hour, then that's gonna be it. That's flat out for 1 hour. Okay. So maybe if you're gonna ride for like maybe 3 or 4 hours, you're gonna ride for 100 kilometers, then maybe it should be pushed at around 3 or 4/10 effort or 40%, okay, of your maximum effort. So always ask yourself, if you push this effort, can you maintain it? So that's the role of threshold. And lastly, exercise economy. There are many ways of how to minimize cost, which is how much calories you burn or how much oxygen you're using, okay, and how much heart rate is going up. So one is of course hitting the gym. Proper movement mechanics actually help a lot in and strength training has shown, studies have shown that it improves exercise economy. Okay, so best to actually best to actually hit the gym and improve that exercise economy. Okay, so all of the three are very important to improve performance on the bike. Okay, next slide, please. So we're at the last part of my talk, and actually I attended this seminar webinar. They call it the Endurance Clinic back in 2014 at the NSCA headquarters in Colorado Springs in Colorado, and I got to talk to three actually esteemed coaches in their own right. Okay, Dr. Alan Lim, okay, Coach Gail Bernhard, one of the most successful American Olympic coaches, and of course Coach Mike Derner, a para Olympic coach in the USA Cycling, and from there, as you can see, I'm wearing this Gatorade jacket that I really love. And I got a lot of information about cycling based on data like power. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a photo with Dr. Dalam, but I got a couple of his slides and I'm borrowing it from him. Okay, next. So principle number one, there's four principles from Dr. Dalam. So first one is start where you are, not where you want to be. Okay, so it's very important to know where your fitness level are. Do not, I mean, sometimes we think that, especially people returning athletes, they feel that they're still strong. Okay, definitely the road to progress is gonna be fast. Okay, but very important to know and assess where you are currently. Okay, so I have this client of mine. Okay, this is back in 2015. Okay, he started Fitness is Blue and it started very good. Okay, he was very consistent, and then all of a sudden there's like a holiday in the Philippines, and he actually increased his mileage. So every day he's riding, and the fitness really went up. The downside of that is, of course, there's a bit of shock and for the body to handle that much stress. So the fatigue, the pink line is went really high, and of course that actually suppresses the immune system. So after that holiday, he got sick, his fitness went down, so it was not good. So what we did was, he told me, Coach, can you check out my data? And we work from there. So after that incident of him getting sick, I check out his data and we work with a structured program. Okay, we progressed the right way, and the fatigue, even it goes up, the gray bars or the form wasn't really getting too low, as you can see here on the low end in the middle. Okay, so that's very important if you're using data. Okay, and if you're using, if your coach actually uses heart rate data or power data to actually assess where you are and progress from there. Okay, so very important. After this one, he actually won fourth in a duathlon, and it's really nice to see that we have made progress as we were training. Okay, next slide, please. So next is, of course, creating movement patterns first and conditioning second. So again, the biomechanics is at the bottom of the pyramid. So very important to dial in that position first. Okay. And if you have any soreness on aches, and then you can adjust the bike as well. Okay. And off the bike, you can do proper strength and conditioning. There are a lot of strength coaches out there who offer online coaching now, Zoom, that can help you really get that movement correctly, because those movement patterns not only improves your performance but also minimizes injuries as well. Okay, so very important to get in touch with the right coach, okay, and the ones who really are focused on the proper form. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, third is organized training to adapt to harder workouts and rest to work harder. So this is another model of the gas principle of Hans Selye. And of course, very important that if you get fatigued, you rest. Because if you do not rest, okay, what comes up must come down. Okay, so very important that your fitness is high, you rest a bit, and then you can progress again. Okay, so very important to also balance out work and rest, which is the next slide. So the next slide is work plus rest equals success. So if you work very hard, you also need to rest very well. Okay. And then that's the time you get success. But it's you have to balance that too. Too much rest will also minimize your success, as well as too much work. So the two has to be pretty much balanced as much as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, and of course, principle 4 is training progressions. Okay, you can always, if you track data like distance or time, okay, I like time based workouts, so you can track that and increase each week by 10%, but it shouldn't be increased by 10% every week. You can increase it by 5%, 8%, 3%. Okay, if you cannot handle that 10%, minimize it. Okay, it's just a guide so that you know that you're making progress. Okay, which goes me to my next slide. Okay, so very important to have this rule. So if you have a calendar, you have a target event that you're progressing, you can use the 3:1 rule. As you can see in the slide to the right, 3 weeks of work and then 1 week of rest. Okay, but it's not always the case. You can go with the 2:1 ratio of 2 weeks load, 1 week rest. Okay, the rest week is not always very low. Okay, it can be like a 40%, 30% drop in your first 2 weeks. Okay, it's just really to get that adaptation and have that super compensation that you're looking for and progress again for the next couple of weeks. Okay, so it really depends from person to person. What you do outside of cycling, like for example, work, okay, walking the dog, okay, spending time, that also adds up. But of course, that's really good for the morale. So do not forget to balance things out. And of course, right now, families first. So spend time with your loved ones as you also train. Slide. Okay, thank you very much for listening. And back to you, Chiki.
Wow, thank you very much, Coach Sol Sibayan. And you got me hooked in those principles that you mentioned. Start where you are at, not where you want to be. So I'll ask you more about that later on. Okay, so guys, how about a virtual round of applause for Coach Sol Sibayan? Later on, we'll be posting some of your questions. I found out from our back end team that we've been seeing a lot of nice questions already. Keep sending those. Remember, you can win any of these prizes. The bike bottle, you need this when you go out, when you start hydrating yourselves, okay, with Gatorade. Our socks, beautiful. Sorry, Gatorade socks in partnership with Vamos. And when you go cycling and you bring it inside your car and you go to a nice place like New Valley and you cycle there, you have to bring your cycling equipment. You need a bag. Gatorade backpack. You need this, okay? And for those of you who'd like to get that certificate of attendance, as mentioned, watch all the way to the end of the show. Wait for that QR code. Make sure that you scan it, and then choose. We'll send you the certificate if you're the lucky one, the chosen one. Okay. Coach Shaw will put you on the side, the virtual backstage. I'll go to our next speaker who'll be speaking about sports nutrition recommended for cyclists. Okay, and I'll be introducing her, an avid, a good athlete as well. She specializes in, hold on, okay, exercise physiology and sports nutrition, manages and supports GSSI service engagements in Latin America, Italy, India, Asia, and China. Oversees the Sports Science Exchange articles, which are housed on www.gssiweb.org, and works with elite athletes and clubs such as Olympic distance runners, triathletes, Ironman triathletes, Olympic badminton players, FC Barcelona, and Manchester City Football Club. And check this out, okay? If I'm not mistaken, she runs less than 4 minutes per kilometer, I believe, okay, on a 10K run or a 21K run. Okay, check out her posts, and a good runner herself. Associate Principal Scientist of Gatorade Sports Science Institute, Dr. Rebecca Randall. Hello, Rebecca. Nice to have you here in our first episode for our webinar series.
You're too kind to me. Thanks for such a nice introduction, and it's a great opportunity to speak today, and thanks to everybody who's attending. So I'm going to talk on the topic, as Chiki said, on sports nutrition recommendations for cyclists. So the next slide, please. Now, the sports nutrition needs of cyclists can be broadly separated into three categories, and that's energy, hydration, and structure or protein or muscle building. And today I'm just going to focus on energy and hydration. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll start with energy, and then I'm going to build on to the hydration section later in the presentation. So for all athletes, well, actually all humans in general, energy is stored within our bodies in the form of fat and carbohydrates. So all athletes, even really muscular and lean athletes, will have a large amount of fat that's stored in the body. But carbohydrate stores are really limited, and you can see that on this slide here. So we have around 80 grams of carbohydrate which is stored in our liver, and then an additional 300 to 500 grams which are stored in the muscle. Now, because we have these smaller amounts of carbohydrate, they can run out, and if they do without replacing, then cyclists will be forced to slow down or will have to completely stop exercising. Next slide, please. So, don't want to overwhelm you with these graphs, but what this study showed is that fatigue is delayed and performance is improved when cyclists and athletes are fed carbohydrate versus a water trial. Now, this performance improvement was attributed to the maintenance of blood glucose. So we had a constant supply of glucose in the blood, and you can see that on the graph on the left-hand side of the screen. And also endurance performance is improved or maintained through an improvement in carbohydrate oxidation, or what I mean by that is the ability to use the carbohydrate that has been ingested for fuels to work our muscles. Next slide, please. And over long periods of time, so for example, days and weeks, the amount of carbohydrate that we have in our muscles, they can be adapted through the amount of carbohydrate that we consume in our diet. Now, this graph shows that when athletes took in a high quantity of carbohydrate in their diet, and they're the ones that are shown in the red circles at the top, they had significantly higher muscle glycogen levels than those that had the low or moderate carbohydrate diets, which are those circles showed in blue and yellow. Not only that, but when they did a measure of performance, and by this they did a time to exhaustion, the group that had the high carbohydrate diet were able to exercise for a lot longer than the athletes that consumed the low carbohydrate or the moderate carbohydrate diet. So this talks about like the chronic dietary approach, so thinking about our diet over like weeks and months, but we can also feed carbohydrate before and during the exercise period. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next section of this presentation. So next slide, please. So once carbohydrate is consumed, it can be absorbed in a few ways in our gut. First of all, if we think about glucose, which is one of the sugars of carbohydrate sugar, that can be absorbed by the SGLT1 transporter. And we can only sustain a certain amount of absorption of glucose, and that's around 1 gram per minute or 60 grams per hour. So carbohydrate sources like glucose, they're generally recommended because they can be taken up quickly and absorbed, and then they can be used by the body for energy. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a role for the slower absorbed carbohydrate sugars like fructose. So fructose has a separate transporter called the GLUT5, and this means that because it has a different transporter to glucose, it can be absorbed in addition to the glucose. Now, this combined type of carbohydrate is especially important for endurance athletes or for cyclists if you're competing or training for more than 2 to 3 hours. And this is also why carbohydrate recommendations are not based on the body weight or the size of the athlete, but they're based on standard absolute amounts as well as the exercise duration. Next slide, please. So again, not wanting to overwhelm you with another graph, but just wanted to summarize the literature that has looked at carbohydrate ingestion. So the grey line and the grey circles, that shows different amounts of glucose which have been ingested. And the black line and the black squares are a combination of different carbohydrate sources, so that glucose and fructose combined. So as previously mentioned, we're only able to absorb about 1 gram per minute of glucose, and that's why you can see that that grey line plateaus off, even when the amount is increased. But then if we have these different types of carbohydrates which are combined, we're able to increase the oxidation rate to 1.5 grams per minute. What I should note is that if you keep increasing that carbohydrate amount, we don't often see a further increase in the utilization of that carbohydrate. And sometimes if we have too much carbohydrate, we might experience gastrointestinal discomfort or stomach upsets. Next slide, please. So what does this all mean in terms of performance? Well, when we have this multiple blend of carbohydrate, we can see an improvement in performance. So on the left-hand bar, that's when a glucose and fructose drink has been consumed. And you can see that the bar is lower, which means that the cyclists were able to complete a set amount of work or distance in a shorter amount of time compared to when water only is ingested. It's actually also superior to glucose, but you can see there in the middle line that glucose was actually better, or the cyclists were able to perform better than when water was consumed. Next slide, please. So I've spoken largely about the research on ingesting carbohydrate, but it's also important to consider carbohydrate intake before and during training or competition. So here are some recommendations for cyclists. So if you are going to do a hard training session, or if you're competing, then the main aim is to make sure that you're fueled properly before you go into that training session or that competition. So it's essential that you consume a pre-exercise meal, and this should be consumed around 1 to 4 hours before the exercise starts. And this meal should include around 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of body mass of carbohydrate. I'll go into some examples on the next slide in a minute about what types of carbohydrate can be consumed, but it's good for you to know like what you can tolerate. So some athletes will be able to tolerate that 4 grams per kilogram, but some might only be able to tolerate the 1 to 2 grams per kilogram. So it's all about working out the right timing for you, the right amount of carbohydrate and the type. We also recommend that you limit your fat, fiber, and protein intake in that training or competition meal, because those types of foods can slow the absorption process and might result in GI distress. Now, before training, some people like a top-up of carbohydrate in maybe the hour before, and these types of carbohydrates should be high in glycemic carbs, like a sports drink, a gel, or a banana. And then after that exercise bout, if you're planning on doing 2 sessions a day, or if you're training for having those 2 sessions and there's not a lot of time in between the 2, it's also important to get on another source of carbohydrate. So the recommendations here is to ingest 1 to 1.2 grams of every kilogram of your body weight every 4 hours. And then after that, you can resume your normal eating habits. So having those snacks that are high in carbohydrate for every hour, and then having your normal meals. Next slide, please. So these are just some examples of high carbohydrate foods. You've got your breads, your noodles, your rice, and all of that, and your oats, and all of those could be used for your pre-exercise or your pre-competition meal. Next slide, please. So that's the before and after, but now if we look at the during training or competition fueling needs, if an athlete is training for less than 30 minutes, sometimes eating carbohydrate is not necessary, especially if you're fueled up well beforehand. If training between 45 and 75 minutes, then smaller amounts of carbohydrate might be beneficial. Again, might not necessarily be needed if you're well fueled beforehand. Or you can take a carbohydrate mouth rinse. So just rinse in the mouth with a sports drink, and you can either ingest that or you can spit it out, and you still get that beneficial effect. If you're training and competing for 1 to 2 hours, then the recommendations to take on board are 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour, and to make sure that we have the forms of carbohydrate which are rapidly oxidized and well tolerated. And to give you just some perspective, a typical sports drink normally has around 30 grams of carbohydrate in it. And then when moving to those more endurance periods, so exercising for 2 to 3 hours, the recommendation is to have 60 grams per hour. And then when we get to those even more endurance events, so if we're exercising or training for more than 2.5 hours or 3 hours, that's when we have to make sure that we have that blend of carbohydrates. So looking for a carbohydrate source that has the glucose and fructose combined. Next slide, please. So, and these are some sources of foods and drinks that you can take on board during exercise. So your sports drinks, bananas if tolerated, and some gummy sweets. Next slide. So to summarize that section, carbohydrate is well known to improve endurance. Our stores in our body are limited and can be depleted, so we need to make sure that we we fill them back up or we maintain them by ingesting carbohydrate. We can do that through our diet, so making sure that we have a moderate to high carbohydrate diet, but also by acutely feeding carbohydrate before and during the exercise bout. Just also need to make sure that we can tolerate the carbohydrate. So if you're not used to consuming carbohydrate, make sure that's increased slowly. And if you're exercising for a particularly long time and performance is the main outcome, then looking for those multiple transportable carbohydrates or that blend of carbohydrate. Next slide, please. So stated at the beginning, talked about energy, but I'd also like to just cover hydration. Next slide. So if we have improper hydration or if we become dehydrated, it can have many severe consequences. So the lack of fluid can increase the strain on our heart and our cardiovascular system. It can increase the use of glucose. And as I said, we don't have much storage of that, so we need to make sure that we conserve as much carbohydrate in our muscles as possible, and can also affect our thermoregulation, so we can overheat and can increase our risk of heat illnesses. Next slide. So the available literature suggests that if we lose more than 2% of our body mass due to sweating, and that's what we class as being in a dehydrated state, then there's impairments in our cognitive function, so we can't think as clearly, but also our aerobic performance, which is very important for cyclists. And then if dehydration becomes more severe, so we're losing even more body weight due to sweating, that can also impact our high intensity performance, as well as our aerobic performance in cooler situations or climates. Next slide. So the best way to determine an athlete's or your own hydration needs is to find out how much fluid you're losing through sweat. And we do that by measuring sweat rate. Next slide. But also we need to acknowledge the things that can affect our hydration status. So the temperature, the humidity, if that's particularly hot, we're going to sweat more, that will influence our hydration status. The exercise intensity as well as our own training status will all play a role in how well our body water is maintained. And if we're wearing more equipment, if we're wearing more clothing, then we're likely to sweat more and become dehydrated faster. Next slide. Now, these are some practical examples or a practical way of how you can determine your sweat rate. So we need to make sure that we're preventing significant dehydration. This, we need to calculate how much sweat an athlete loses during exercise. The simplest way to do this is to test the athlete's sweat rate. So to do this, we calculate the body mass change from pre to post exercise. So if you want to try this at home, you just need to jump on the scales or the weighing scales before you go out for your cycle ride in minimal clothing. Go out and do your exercise session, come back and then take your body weight again. And that change in your body weight is what we say is how much sweat that you've lost. And that can tell you what your sweat rate is, providing that you didn't take on board any hydration. So for example, if I step on the scales and I weigh 69 kilograms, I went out and did a cycle ride, I come back and I weigh 68 kilograms, I've lost a kilogram of fluid, and over that hour, my sweat rate is 1 litre per hour. So I know that I'm sweating 1 litre over that hour period. When you have all of that information, so on the next slide, you can see a calculation on how to measure or calculate your own sweat rate. Now, if you're like me and you're not very good at calculations or math, which I'm really not, you can see at the bottom of the slide there that there's a calculator online, which you can use to put all that information in and can measure your own sweat rate. So why is this important? So on the next slide, you'll see that everybody sweats differently. So this was a study that we did at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, and we tested the sweat rate of lots of different athletes. And that graph on the left-hand side shows all of those athletes and their sweat rate. So we had some athletes that would sweat very minimally, so around 0.5 litres per hour. And then we had some athletes that would lose around 5 litres per hour of fluid. So they had particularly high sweat rates. So this is just to say that not every athlete is the same, and we need to treat every single person as an individual. So just coming to the end of my presentation, on the next slide, just want to highlight that we also need to take into account the exercise intensity and the temperature that we are exercising in. So in a low intensity cycle ride, if it's in a cool condition, we might have a very low sweat rate. So on that left-hand side, you can see in that low intensity cool condition, the sweat rate is around 1 litre per hour. But then that same athlete might exercise in a high intensity condition, in a hot condition, and their sweat rate will be around 2.2 litres per hour. So you see that we need to take into account the situation that we're exercising in and measure our sweat rate accordingly. Okay, so just to wrap up, the last section on the next slide, we must remember to practice our hydration strategy. It's expected that we will lose some body weight during exercise, and this is completely normal, but we need to make sure that we try to maintain our body weight as best as possible within that 2% region. Knowing our sweat rate and knowing how much we should be drinking will also prevent overhydration. So this is another reason why we say to have that individualized hydration plan. And then throughout the day, just making sure that you're gradually intaking water or fluids throughout the day. But again, avoid drinking too much too quickly, because if you just drink it all in one go, you'll just see it out through the other end. So yeah, just sipping on fluids throughout the day. And then in my final slide, just to say that if you're going to take on board any of these recommendations, please just don't go and do them all at once. And we need to train our guts to be able to tolerate the changes in our sports nutrition. So taking on board smaller amounts of carbohydrate over time, and then we'll get to a point where we can tolerate that carbohydrate amount. So I'd like to finish my presentation there, and thank you all again, and welcome any questions.
Wow, thank you very much, Rebecca Randall. Again, virtual round of applause for Rebecca there. Funny, Rebecca, I've heard you already last year when we had a session similar to this one, right? And I was taking down notes the first time I met you. I still found myself still taking down notes based on your presentation. Okay, so we're gonna open the floor now with our Q&A. I found out from our back-end team that they're finding it difficult to choose the winning questions because we have a lot of questions, and those who will be chosen will either get the bottle, a pair of socks, or the backpack. And don't forget about that certificate. Okay, wait for that QR code. So I'd like to bring in my friends Rebecca and Coach Saul, please. Thank you guys, awesome presentation as always, very informative, and we've learned a lot. But okay, we've chosen a couple of questions. We're gonna flash them right now. I'm gonna go round robin here. I'll start with Coach Saul, and then I'll move on to Rebecca, and we'll go alternate. Okay, for Coach Saul, this is your first question, Coach. You've interacted with numerous cyclists in your career right now. What do you think is a common mistake or misconception of someone starting to learn the sport, and how should this be best addressed? Okay, Coach Saul? Coach, I think you're on mute. You gotta unmute that. Don't worry, it happens. Don't worry. That's normal. That's the new normal now. Go ahead, Coach. But you are still on mute, Coach. So you have to unmute again. We'll try it again. We'll try it again. Take note, Coach Saul is in Qatar as we speak. And Rebecca, I know you're in London right now, right? There you go. Coach, we'll try it
Okay.
again. There you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
There. Thank you. Sorry for that. Yes. With regards to the question, thank you, Chiki. A common misconception is that they think that cycling is easy. You know that you're just gonna pedal the bike, and of course a lighter bike, a more aerodynamic bike is actually faster. But of course, it's the person, it's the engine, and it's you, the one spinning the pedals, that's gonna propel you forward. Okay, and even if you are a good runner, getting on the bike is gonna be a different movement pattern, and it's not gonna translate 100%. Okay, even if, for example, you're an endurance athlete like running or swimming, and then you hop on the bike, it's a totally different VO2 max number, a totally different fitness level. So the firing patterns of the muscles gonna be totally different, and maybe a couple of days after engaging in cycling is gonna catch up. So that's one of my few misconceptions that people see, that cycling is relatively easy. It's actually fun, but it's not always the case that if you're a good endurance athlete, like in different, like swimming or running, as I said, it's gonna translate 100% also on the bike.
Coach, I have a follow up question, okay? Because this is coming from me already, and I'll keep that question there on the screen, because cycling definitely has gone bigger here in our country, right? And you've done cycling even before its popularity increased here in the Philippines. What would you think would be the main differences for you, Coach? Top of mind, main differences of the sport during your time when you started cycling, and then now when people are picking it up, and what would be the nice advantages of the sport growing rapidly. People, you see people on the main road, on EDSA, on the side streets in the provinces,
Yeah,
buying different types of bikes, road bikes, mountain bikes, tri bikes, even the foldies, right? So and I see Rebecca
trade-offs. Yeah.
smiling there. We have a lot of bikes here, Rebecca, in the country. What would be the main difference, Coach Sol, and what would be the advantages for you?
I think one is the availability of items now. More brands are coming in, better fabrics, I'd say, better technology. So actually, they can really benefit from a lighter bike now, a more technically advanced. And before, the tracking of the data was very hard. So we had to do logs with a notebook and check. Now everything is with a mobile phone or with apps, with bike computers, watches, and everything is now logged through the internet. So it's very easy to track data and analyze data as compared to before. And another is, of course, before, bike fitting, of course, I'm going to say best to consult a bike fitter. But back then, it's all like bike feel. Okay, if we felt that it's going to be painful for the back, we're going to tweak our position. And it wasn't, now it's really an exact science. There's more research being done in setting up the bike. And we've seen people increase their power or either maintain their power and being more efficient. There are very ways on, like, wind tunnel testing, improved helmet design, footwears now being heat moldable for a more personalized fit. You can even order a personalized shoe. I mean,
Yeah.
our suppliers can actually bring in our. We have molding socks here. Like, the if you have a fracture, you can actually put it on and actually mold that and cut it and send it to the supplier for a very customized shoe. And of course, that's gonna be very expensive. So one of the downsides also of the technology picking up, like it's like F1 now, is of course the prices is actually very high, and
Oh
people
yeah.
think that you need a very expensive bike to perform well. I've seen cyclists using a low end bike competing with high end. So of course it's the engine first, but if you put a high, a very fit athlete, okay, with the best bikes in the market, that's gonna be another level. So the gear will help definitely, but it's not the ends. Okay, and there's always some things like, you know, always I tell people, you start with tires. If you want to improve performance, start with really good set of tires. Okay, a
Mhm,
proper
mhm.
apparel that's form fitting, because you don't want to have the clothes like it's gonna flap around and it's like a parachute. So those stuff, and that has improved a lot over the years. Like 15 years down the line was really really big in terms of technology.
I like how you answered that, Coach. And I think I opened up
Thank you.
something here, and if I keep on asking, right, Rebecca, the questions will not end because you mentioned about technology, you mentioned about the type of bike, the engine, the type of athlete that sits in there. But we'll try. I'm asking our friends from Gatorade and GSSI. We'll try to answer all your questions. Okay, we won't be able to post all the questions on the show, but we'll try to answer them separately. But Coach Sol, if there's one thing I know that will not change, regardless of the time, or the era, or the period in the bicycle, is that any bike that has a bike bottle cage, this bottle would definitely fit in. That's
Yes,
for sure.
definitely. That's the same size.
Okay.
That's for sure.
Okay. So if you want to get this, post your questions now, and I'm going to give you this or the socks or the bag. Okay. I move on to Rebecca here. Rebecca, this is for you. Okay, we'll put the question on the screen there. If a beginner cyclist would skimp on nutrition and hydration, what do you think are the possible outcome, and what would you advise these cyclists? Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I want a pair of those socks if you could send them over to me. But yeah, to the question, I think it all depends on the goal of the cyclist. So, if you're going out for your 30-minute cycle and it's low intensity, you're okay to not take on board any nutrition during, but you need to make sure that you replenish the stores that you've used afterwards. So having a good meal. In your country, I know it's particularly hot. That's when hydration is even more important, because you can be dehydrated quicker with one of those lovely bottles. So yeah, if the temperature is really hot, if you know that you're sweating a lot, that is probably when you would need more hydration taken on board and more fluids, more sports drinks as well. So yeah, being careful in those hot conditions. So as a beginner, I would say like play around with your nutrition, see what suits you, and then yeah, making a plan which is individualized and specific to you is always the best way.
Well said, Rebecca. Probably a tip as well to the cyclists. Please make sure your stopovers are not more than your actual bike ride, okay? Because I see a lot of beginners who stop a lot, but the ride is less. Okay, I go back to Coach Saul. We'll throw you a question, Coach Saul. We'll go alternate here. Direct, if you could flash our next question for Coach Saul. Here you go. What do you think of cyclists, Coach Saul, who do not do any kind of warm up before a ride? They just ride on the bike, sit on the saddle, pedal away. Is it really important? And what's a proper technique in case warm up is needed? What's a proper technique of warm up that you could recommend before pedaling away? Go ahead, Coach Saul.
Thank you, Chiki. Thanks for the question. I believe I actually replied to Hector, who actually posted that on Facebook. Um, that's of course if, for example, it's very common if a group of people park in a spot like a parking lot and they meet, and then from there off the bat they start the rides. It's very important that while waiting for your friends, can stretch a bit, do dynamic stretches, stretch your quads or calf, your hamstrings. Um, Very important because you need to loosen the hips as well, and a bit of shoulder is gonna be very static, and you might have issues as well. And it's gonna be helpful to get you in a good position on the bike. And of course, increase that heart rate a bit. Okay. Second is of course, if you're gonna start, I'd say the first 15-20 minutes of the ride would be talking to each other, light intensity, okay, high cadence. How you usually the old school is actually being in the inner ring. If you're using a one bike, then go with the lighter at the back. Okay, so that's usually the case with a smaller ring, and then you spin the pedals faster, having a higher cadence, and that's gonna increase the heart rate. And then once you feel that you're breaking out the sweat in the forehead, that's one sign that your core temperature is actually increased a bit, and you're in a way ready to start doing hard work or tempo efforts. But again, do not push hard, okay, off the bat. And I'd say there's a Tagalog, I don't know if it's a Tagalog term or a different dialect, we call it bunsol. That when the race starts, like for example, you haven't done a warm up, you feel that your legs is gonna really um, explode or having that rush of blood inside, and actually that's one of the techniques that we have done in like small races in the past, that we start late and then people just sit there, and then when the race starts they push the tempo very hard, so they know that those people, those other people haven't done their warm up, they're gonna feel it in their legs and down they're gonna drop back. So best to lessen that feeling by warming up properly.
Love that. Okay, so make sure that you warm up. As mentioned, the first 15 minutes, right, Coach Sol? In the vernacular, Rebecca, we call it the kwentuhan pace, the chit chat pace. The first 15 minutes, chat
Yes.
with your bike buddy. And when you start running a sweat, as Coach mentioned, go pedal away, but don't forget to hydrate. Okay, you have to hydrate with Gatorade. That's important. We go back to Rebecca. We're gonna pose this question, Rebecca. I'm going to give the guys a hard time to choose the best question. Here you go. What are the major effects of hypo and hyperhydration, especially for the cyclist?
Yeah, that's a difficult and a great question. If I could choose one for winning, that would be my one. So it's difficult because the side effects of hypohydration, so dehydration, and hyperhydration or over drinking, are quite similar. So that dizzy feeling, and sometimes feeling a bit fatigued or sick. And that's why we say stick to your own hydration plan. So if you know how much you're going to sweat, you know how much you're going to drink, and you're going to prevent that hypohydration, so under drinking, but also the hypohydration and over drinking. So it's all about knowing you as a person and having your plan in place, and that will make sure that those effects, that side effects that come from both of those things, won't happen.
Fantastic. Thank you there for that straightforward answer, Rebecca. We're down to our last two questions, one for Coach Sol and one for Rebecca. Coach Sol, I go back to you. I love this question, okay? Any tips on uphill roads, or what we would call here in the Philippines, right? Or I mean in other areas too, uphill, right? When you start pedaling upwards. I know proper gears should be considered, but not everyone can afford the gears right now. Any tips, Coach Sol?
Usually bikes now have a cassette at the back that has a big ratio, especially mountain bikes and beginner bikes. So one of which is to look front and then see like 100 meters ahead, and then you can prepare your gear selection and putting it in the lighter gear at first, and then you pace it well. And then as you do more climbing, as you do more riding, you get the feel that, okay, I can push the tempo, make it to a the heavier gear, slightly smaller at the back, and push it more. Okay, but it's always gonna be, it's a learning experience. Okay, pacing your efforts well for long climbs is actually a skill. Pacing actually in any endurance event is actually a skill. It's not, that or even technology, even assisted technology, pacing techniques is actually a skill that you need to learn and experience. So I'd say the gears are important, like purchasing lightweight parts, the exotic carbon fiber items, but that's gonna help a bit. I'd say the gearing is more important. So check out with the mechanic, with the local bike shop, and have the right gears. I'd say now it's very challenging because everybody is looking for parts. But actually, I'd say that always try to look for good secondhand. Okay, that's always gonna be my tip for beginners, because it's gonna be very overwhelming in terms of the price of the items. But you can always help out, ask a friend who has other spare parts that can still be used. Okay, definitely it's gonna help.
Love that answer, Coach. I mean, there's a big community of cyclists in the Philippines. Ask away, right? Ask away, and they'd be glad to help you. Or the easiest way, you get an e-bike. You're going up, turn on that machine, and easier
Yes,
going up. I'm just
yeah,
kidding, of
instant
course.
motor.
Okay. Last question. I go back to Rebecca. Rebecca, this is for you. What would be the best solution or best food/fluid to take if you bonk during a ride,
Yeah,
Rebecca?
I think we've all felt that feeling before, and I think the first thing is we want to try and prevent that from happening in the first place. So making sure that you are having some form of energy, even when you don't feel like you need it, but to prevent that bonk from happening later on in your ride, because it's a horrible feeling. But if it does happen, the best food and fluids to take are those foods and fluids that are high in carbohydrate. So these would be the jellies that I showed you, the gels if you have access to it, the sports drinks that are available, bananas, they're cheap and they're easy to transport on the bike because you've got something to carry it in. So any kind of fruit that's easy to be transported. So yeah, they would be my top tips, but also having something earlier on in the ride to make sure that you don't bonk later on.
And of course, if right, Rebecca, water it's refreshing, but water's not enough. If you need to replenish your lost electrolytes, right, you go for this one. You know why? Because nothing beats Gatorade. Whew. Okay, thank you guys for answering those fantastic questions. And for those who sent the questions, our team will choose the best questions, and you'll get either the pair of socks, the bottle, or the Gatorade bag. Okay, so we're at the end of our first segment
Yeah.
here.
Chicky?
Before I go ahead,
Yeah.
Coach.
Just to add, sorry, Rebecca, and for the back team, almost forgot, but it's actually here in the showroom. It's
Oh.
best to have like a saddle bag also if it's your first time. What items that you need to have, like a spare tube, inner tube, okay, and tire lever so that you can change the tire. Vulcanizing kit if, for example, you have another puncture, you can vulcanize that old inner tube, and of course a multi tool. Okay, a multi-tool that has all the like a chain tool, hex wrench, hex tools, and lastly either a CO2. I don't have it with me now, but a CO2 flask or a hand pump that you can actually put in the back pocket, and at least you can get home. Okay, you don't have to call a cab or your other significant other to pick you up.
Tools. Don't forget the tools, right? You should have that. Okay. Apart from your hydration and your nutrition. Okay, we're done with the first part, but before I let the two of you go, one in Qatar, our lovely guest, Miss Rebecca in London, time to bid farewell to your viewers and give your parting messages to everyone watching us right now. Coach Sol from Qatar, I'll start with you. Go ahead, Coach.
Thank you first and foremost to the Gatorade Sports Science Institute for inviting me here for Gatorade Philippines, Marsha, Chiki, and the rest of the team. Of course, to Dr. Rebecca as well. And to all my friends and family who have supported me and who have shared the posts from Gatorade and my posts as well, and the others' posts sharing on social media to support this webinar series. Thank you very much. And I look forward to I hope to see you here in Qatar and visit our showroom.
Coach Sol Sibayan, all the way from Qatar. Thank you very much, Coach. Maraming salamat sa iyo. I go to Rebecca, all the way from London. Your parting message, Rebecca?
Thanks, Chiki. It's always a privilege to be a part of these webinars, and they also hold a really special place in my heart. So it's really lovely to be involved and to speak on my first one, I think, this time. So thanks so much. Thanks, Coach Saul, and thanks to everyone for listening as well.
Thank you very much, Rebecca Randall and Coach Sol Sibayan, our two guest speakers for our first session for GSSI Webinar Series 2021. Guys, take care, stay safe, and stay healthy, and we'll see you guys soon, okay? Bye-bye, guys. We're not yet done, ladies and gentlemen, and now that we have knowledge on the basics, okay, for the next segment, papakinggan natin ang point of view ng dalawang mahuhusay na atleta. Ano pa? Practical applications and tips from these two na actually ibang field sila, no? Ibang sport sila pareho. But yung isa, professional cyclist na talaga, no? Professional multi-sport athlete, while the other one is starting to enjoy the sport of cycling. And again, reminding everyone, if you want to engage with our guest athletes, please type in your questions down there at the comment box, and you'll get to win any of these cool prizes: the socks, Gatorade socks, Gatorade, the bike bottle, and of course the Gatorade backpack. And for those of you who want to get that certificate of attendance at the end of the show, we'll put the QR code, scan it, and you'll be able to get that certificate of attendance. I will now introduce let me call them our super athletes. Dalawa sila, one male and one female. And allow me to share on our screen here something that we prepared for them. Ladies first tayo, okay? A volleyball athlete, actually a member of the Philippine national team. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to our webinar series Miss Aya Laure, and joining her, 2 times SEA Games gold medalist, a national triathlete, and also actually a good vlogger. If you get to watch some of his videos, a friend of mine as well, Mr. Nico Huelgas. Hello, Aya. Hello, Nico. Magandang hapon sa inyong dalawa. Hope you guys are doing okay. Siguro I'll start with Aya. Aya, ikaw muna. Kamusta ka? How are you doing?
I'm good, I'm fine. Eto, nandito muna. Nasa dorm.
Oh,
And
nice.
pag may free time, nagbabike.
Very good, very good. Nico, kapatid, ikaw naman, long time no see. Mga ilang buwan na tayo nung huling nagkita. Kamusta ka naman, Nico, quickly before we jump into our kwentuhan?
Okay naman. Coping with everyday, errands. Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nico. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes may makikita kayo sa kalsada, nagbibisikleta, urban ride, and you'll say, kamukha ni Nico Huelgas yun. Malamang si Nico Huelgas nga po talaga yun because he really goes around on his bicycle. Nico, I'll start with you. Diyan ka lang muna. Don't worry. We'll go alternating the questions. Kung magkwentuhan muna tayo dito. No? So your fans can also ask questions. Nick, I'll start with you. You started as a swimmer in college. Kailan at paano yung introduction mo into cycling, no? Kailan na paano nag-umpisa yan? And can you share with us yung hurdles, yung obstacles mo, yung kung meron man, Nico, sa pag-transition mo from swimming into cycling?
I remember it like it was just yesterday. Yung pagpasok to cycling. Actually, it was just a forced kind of situation. I was already a swimmer and doing aquathlons. I was qualifying for the national triathlon team back in 2009. And then, when I was told ng federation na I need to buy a bike so I can do triathlon, that's when the only time I decided that I have to buy a bike. But other than that, yes. When I first started to buy a bike, my first hurdle was I didn't know what to get in terms of specifications. And I'm very sure for a lot of the listeners, pinagdaraanan yan. Ang alam ko lang na decided ko was the type of bike, which is a road bike. Kasi the way we decided on buying bikes, I'm very sure it's because of the group of people that were joining in. So kung ang kagrupo mo, puro mga road bikers, mga barkada mo, mountain bikers, edi bibili ka ng mountain bike. So ako naman, because of my job as a triathlete na kailangan road bike, I had to buy a road bike. Pero other than that, the mga hurdles was, the greatest one actually was the first, in which I always tell the people as well na we need to buy the right size.
Okay.
And I never know that yung in-explain ni Coach Sol about the inseam, yung specific measurements, kasi kapag maling right size mo, injury prone yan agad.
Sisingilin ka rin, di ba, Nico? No? Sisingilin ka nun. I mean, you can ride the bike but later on, you'll feel mga sakit and pain all over your body, di ba?
Yes, no matter how fit you are. And I felt that for a time na parang mukhang mali yung paglagay ko ng positionings ng seat post at yung upuan. But other than that, the way I choose my bikes, kailangan maganda itsura. Passion talaga minsan eh.
Totoo yun, di ba? I mean, kidding aside, mayroon tayong saying na if you can't perform, ja-forms, di ba? Pero in your case, di ba? In your case, Nico, ikaw kasi, sport mo talaga yan. Kailangan, apart from doing it well, maganda rin naman, di ba? You feel, if you look good, you feel good, you perform better. Agree, Nico? Di ba?
Agree. But that's not the thing. Pinaka mabigat na hurdle ko talaga was training for it na. Buying a road bike, I bought it na. Although hindi ko alam masyado yung mga specification, doing rides with a certain group of people, with your friends, habang tumatagal, parang sumasakit yung puwet mo.
Oo.
Yung sa may
Totoo
saddle
yun.
part. Kasi you've been biking for long hours. And wala kang takas dyan. na-feel ko na parang it takes a lot of bike time for you to um, cope up with that kind of experience.
Saddle time talaga, no? Saddle time. Nico, salamat dun sa shinare mo. Real talk yun, eh, no? And now, I go to Ea. Si Ea siguro, baka si Kuya Chiki, kung itanong sa akin ito, mga pang professional, huwag kang magalala. Alam mo bakit, Ea? Ako, mga siguro 9 years na into biking, ang tawag, I always tell sila, Nico, I'm the forever newbie. Ha? Forever newbie in the cycling world. And yun yung tatanong ko sa iyo, Ea. Sport mo talaga, volleyball. Tindi mo dyan, ang galing mo dyan. Galing ka talaga sa pamilya na super athletes. I salute your dad, by the way, no, and then your other siblings in the sport. But ikaw muna, Ea, what influenced you to try out this sport, itong cycling, ano? And ano yung initial goal mo, initial purpose mo nung bumili ka ng bisikleta at sinakyan mo na yung bisikleta? Ano yung nasa isipan mo noon, Ea?
Yung nag-influence talaga sa akin yung mga coaches ko kasi parang wala nga akong ginagawa since nung lockdown. And of course, yung boyfriend ko din and si Kuya Nico. Kasi
Ba?
nakikita ko yung Instagram stories niya na nagbabike siya na parang, ay parang pwede to gawin during pandemic. So, ayun. Kaya kay Kuya Nico din ako nagtanong noon na, Kuya, di ba triathlete ka? Ganon, ganon. Tapos, parang doon nagbigay pa siya ng mga basic guidelines na kung saan bibili ng bike, kung ano yung mga dapat kong tignan bago ako bumili ng sarili kong bike. Kaya ayun.
Maganda yung tinanungan mo, eksperto. 'Di ba? Pero
Talaga.
sana ginawa lang ni Kuya Nico mo, hindi pamahal ng pamahal, no? Dapat pa nagtatanong, within budget. Pero kilala ko yan si Nico, would always help, 'di ba? Dun sa mga nagtatanong. And how was the experience, nung nakakuha ka ng ganong tips sa isang eksperto tulad ni Nico? Mas nakadali ba dun sa riding experience mo?
Mas nakadali at saka parang kahit papaano, wala kasi talaga akong idea pagdating sa bike. Parang gusto ko lang talaga siya i-try during this pandemic since bawal pa naman mag-volleyball and kumbaga, bawal pa gumamit ng court. So, inisip ko
Oo.
talaga, ay parang maganda tong i-try tong bike na to. Kaya si Kuya Nico yung naisip ko kagad din nun since, yun, pumasok na sa isip ko na, ay, triathlete. So, si Kuya Nico.
Good yan,
Kaya,
good yan.
ayun.
Good yung tinanungan mo. Sana later on magustuhan mo rin yung sport na triathlon, mahila ka rin namin diyan. Nico, I go back to you, okay? Coming from yung presentation, yung enriching presentation ni Dr. Rebecca Randall. Real talk, Nico, how much importance really do you put sa sports nutrition and hydration? I mean, yung sport mo, yung triathlon, whether it be a short distance or Olympic distance, half Ironman, full yan, duathlon pa, how much importance do you put in nutrition and hydration, Nix?
So much. I put so much importance in it, just like training sessions. For me, it's the invisible type of workout na hindi pinag-uusapan.
Okay.
Kasi we usually post about our training programs, yung binibigay sa atin ng coach. Pero itong mga nutrition and hydration preparations, it's something na minsan hindi na pinag-uusapan ng coach nyo eh. Minsan, at the same time, yung mga hydration plans. And it was very crucial nung nakita ko rin kay Doc na sobrang na-validate about making sure you stick to your hydration plan.
Importante yun, Nix, ano? That you stick to that, na hindi ka nag-i-eksperimento, di ba?
Yes. You experiment lang during training on times na you don't feel satisfied with your performance. Pero kapag during competition na, the day prior, you should never experiment.
Don't try something new. I would hear that. Nagkakaroon tayo ng mga chats before races sa mga triathlon and we would see triathletes all of a sudden, di ba? Sprinting to the restroom because they did something new. Come race day and people would say, huwag kang mag-eksperimento dyan. Gawin mo yan pag nag-iensayo ka. Tama?
Yes.
Okay. I like that. Thank you for sharing that with us, Nico. And gusto ko lang sabihin sa viewers natin, Nico, if you see Nico Huelga cycling or running or what, tapos na yung ensayo, no? Wag naman siguro sa gitna ng training. Tanungin niyo yan. Hindi madamot sa hindi madamot sa impormasyon yan. Pwede niyong kamustahin yan and he'll be glad to tell you, give you tips if you see him on the road. I go back to you. When you started cycling, no? Tapos narinig mo yung mga sinabi ni Coach Sol kanina, yung mga guidelines, 'di ba? Yung sabi ni Coach Sol, umpisahan mo dun sa kakayanan mo, wag dun sa end goal kasi pag gusto mo yung end goal baka masira lang yung experience mo, no? So some of those tips, the principles, would you say that you started gradually with sa sport na ito with these basic guidelines? Yan din ba yung mga panuntunan o yung mga guidelines na sinundan mo when you started enjoying this new sport of cycling?
Yes, kasi nag-start din ako sa mga short ride lang from like Rotonda, Welcome Rotonda to Luneta Park. Ganun lang muna
Wow,
yung
okay.
first ride ko na yun. And then, after that, to be honest, sumakit yung katawan ko. Kasi hindi ko siya in-expect na parang, ay, may mga hindi pala pantay-pantay na road dito sa Manila. Parang, ay, ang masakit pala masakit pala pag uphill or, I mean, pagpaahon.
Oo.
Bike. And then, yun pa, yung natutunan ko kanina is yung tamang size ng frame. Kasi yung first ko na bike, parang medium lang yung nabili ko. And then, yung
Okay.
pangalawa, naging large na siya. So, parang naka-help na siya sa tuhod ko. Kasi yung first, parang uncomfortable yung tuhod ko noon. Dahil medium lang siya. Tapos, nung nag-adjust na siya sa large, ayun, mas nakatulong siya. And mas naka-ride ako sa mas malalayong ride.
Gusto ko yung share mo, Eya, and I hope yung viewers natin na nakaka-relate sa'yo. Yung mga iba siguro na hindi alam na after nagpunta ko niya ng Novali, sumakay, pag-uwi, ang sakit ng katawan, check your bike size. Na? Importante yung sinabi ni Eya dahil minsan doon nag-uumpisa lahat ng kalbaryo ninyo sa pagbibisikleta. Check the bike size. At mahirap yung ginawa mo, Welcome Rotonda to Luneta. Apart from the distance, umiiwas ka pa sa mga sasakyan yan. So, fantastic sharing there. Oh, eto. Let's talk hydration, guys. Kayong dalawa, tatanungin ko nito. Can you cite a scenario or an actual experience ninyo wherein you felt correct or you felt right or hindi tama nung may about hydration, no? That affected your performance? May pinasok ka sa katawan mo na dahil doon, ang ganda ng laro mo, ang ganda ng padjak mo, Nico. And at the same time, may nangyari din ba na nung hindi mo ginawa yon, hindi maganda yung performance mo? Nico, I'll start with you.
Yes, many times. There was one competition where I forgot to put in some Gatorade sa water bottle ko, which I usually do talaga. And nakalimutan ko kasi there's so many logistics in triathlon. There's so many stuff that you prepare, put in your bag, going to race competition. And yung pa yung mga nakalimutan ko. And I brushed it out. Sabi ko, sige, okay lang yan. Isang bagay lang yan na nakalimutan ko. And worst came to worst, bumagal ako sa run. Kasi naubusan ako ng sugars and carbs during the run. So, parang sabi ko, okay, hindi. Never ever, parang disregard yung nutrition mo and carbohydrate load up for the competition.
And I'm guessing, Nico, when you stayed true to your promise na hindi mo nakakalimutan, the next time that you went to a race, that you did not forget this seemingly small thing, tama ba na maganda yung performance nun?
Yeah, I won the races after.
Fantastic. Podium agad, ano?
Podium.
Yun na yun. Real talk yan from Nico Welgas. I go to you with the same question. Nangyari ba yun, in the sport that you play? Okay, I know you're into cycling pa lang, but in the sport that you play in volleyball, nangyari na ba yan sa'yo na siningil ka ng katawan mo when you did not put the proper hydration in it? Or when you did not pay attention, rather, to your hydration plan?
Yes, meron din nun. Same din, nakalimutan ko din yon. And then, nakalimutan kong magdala ng Gatorade sa court nun. Tapos, ayun, hindi ko na-consume yung yung sikreto ko para magstay na energetic, makapalo ng malakas. Kaya ayun, medyo after nun, ni-request ko talaga yun sa coach namin na pwede bang next game, eto na, magbaon na, provide na ng Gatorade. Tapos ayun, after that game, mas nag-improve, mas naging better, nagkaroon ako ng energy para makapalo, makaperform din ng mas maganda.
Iba rin yung sport ninyo, no? If you don't have that needed energy, sisingilin ka, yung palo mo, imbis na 100 kilometers per hour, mga 75 lang yun. Hindi masyadong mabilis yung power. But again, that's real talk from A. Laure. And it's true, dun sa mga viewers natin na hindi alam, yung mga high-level teams like what where A is part of, they prepare for that. And sometimes, the athletes, or more often than not, yung athletes mismo nag-request niyan, di ba? Na kailangan meron ako nito dahil yan ang sikreto ko eh. And you do that, right? To you sa mga nutritionist ninyo, di ba, sa team?
Yes po.
Okay. Eto, may question tayo from one of our viewers right now. Maganda ito kasi may kinalaman sa situation natin ngayon. What keeps you motivated, okay, Aya and Nico, to continue cycling considering yung ating current situation? Nico, wala tayong mga karera. Alam natin yan, di ba? Ang training, ang hirap. Minsan, sarado rin yung mga favorite cycling areas natin, di ba? Sometimes you go up north or down south, and it's not often that we can do that. But ikaw naman, Aya, you're new into cycling, and it's not easy to go urban cycling all the time sa kalsada. But with the current situation right now, ano nagmo-motivate sa inyo to continue doing that in spite of the pandemic na nandito pa rin sa atin? Nico, I'll start with you.
Yes. Very good question. Medyo nawalan ako ng motivation nung pagka first lockdown. Wala yung mga competitions, wala yung mga goals, and I'm very sure kahit sa iya naramdaman yan eh. Pero, nagka-second wind ako nung na-influence ko yung mga neighbors ko at mga childhood best friends na mag-go into cycling. So, mga guys like them and sila, parang na-influence ko sila mag-cycling na parang any tip, sige, do it, sige lang, bato ng bato for free, and I'd be happy to guide you through. And because of that, sila na nakakabay ko during the pandemic. Lumalakas sila, nakakasabay ko sila, so I get more excited pa nga to bike kasi mag-bike sila rather than me cycling alone. So, talaga for me, that's my greatest motivation.
I love that answer, Nico. Yung community, yung family atmosphere ng having a cycling community, whether bago lang or matagal na, if you're part of that really pushes you, and that's true. Aya, on your end, ano yung motivation mo in spite of the situation to enjoy this new sport that you're in?
Ako naman as a beginner, halos similar kay Kuya Nico. Kasi nagkaroon ako ng friends then na bago dahil sa cycling, and also mas na-enjoy mo siya kasi sabay-sabay nga kayong nagbo-bike. And as a beginner, parang kapag naglo-long ride, maghihintayan kayo, yung patience niyo sa isa't isa na to test, gano'n. And ayun, nagkakaroon din kasi kami yung kaming mga volleyball players, nagkakaroon din kami na, uy, mag-bike tayo sa araw na to. So, ayun, isa na din siya sa mga parang nagiging bonding namin. Ganon.
Gusto ko yung sagot ninyo. Alam mo, napaisip ako dito. Aya, Nico, mag-set kaya tayong tatlo, no? Sama natin yung mga nasa Gatorade Philippines, social distancing, tamang number lang, maghanap tayo ng magandang lugar down south or up north, tapos bisikleta tayo. Pag-usapan natin yan with Gatorade Philippines. Okay, guys, salamat sa inyong dalawa. Don't leave. Stay with me here. Kaya itong tatlo natin sa screen ng ating mga viewers. I'd like to remind everyone to please watch until the end ng ating Facebook Live, no? And wait for the instructions at the end of our Facebook Live on how to get that certificate attendance certificate. A QR code will be flashed at the end of this live video na accessible lang po. Okay, accessible lang po at a limited time. Meaning, pag natapos sa po itong recording ng ating live video at na-upload na po ito sa Gatorade Facebook page, by that time, registration for the certificates close na po yan. So make sure that you access the registration link immediately when you see that QR code after while the live show is going. Sa bandang dulo po, ilalabas namin yan. Alright? And then do sa mga selected questions po coming from our viewers, advice po kung paano, kung kayong nanalo, okay, our social media team will get in touch with you. Kung kayo nanalo ng ating Gatorade socks, again, in partnership with Vamos, our bike bottle na Gatorade, napakaganda with that very nice tagline there, nothing beats Gatorade. And for your cycling needs when you go out, di ba, whether beginner ka like sila Eya or ako, mga beginners na kami, kailangan nyo to. Kahit nga si Nico, gumagamit nito eh. Di ba sabi ni Nico, minsan nakakalimutan niya yung mga gamit ng mga Gatorade. Etong daming bulsa nito. Daming mga secret pockets ito. So you need this. Put your cycling shoes there. Put your shirts, di ba? Post-ride. Put your sandwiches. Merienda. Yan, pwede yan. Pwede dito yan. We'll choose the best questions and our social media team will get in touch with you on how to claim your prizes. Also, huwag kakalimutan, first pa lang to ng ating GSSI webinar series. On July 15, our episode 2, ang pag-uusapan natin dyan, training at home. Okay? And let me tickle. May teaser ako dito, Nico, tsaka Eya. Let me tickle a little bit. Meron kaming nandun na pala. Hindi ko na pwedeng i-tickle pala. May special guest kami. All the way from the Orlando Magic. Number 50 at point guard. Next, si Cole Anthony. Kasama po. Of course, nandyan din yung ating mga guest speakers. Si Coach Cale, nandyan din. And huwag nyo kakalimutan, para makumpleto ang party natin, si Dr. Liam Brown will also be there. Okay? July 15, mark your calendars. Facebook Live pa rin po yan. Training at home. Alright. Nico and Eya, unfortunately, it's 5:44 in the afternoon. I love this job, but you know what I hate about it is when we have to say goodbye. Kasi ang sarap ng kwentuhan natin eh. So, before we end the show, I'd like you to give your parting messages sa ating mga viewers. Ladies first tayo. Eya, I'll start with you. Go ahead, Eya Laure.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Gatorade family, kay Miss Marcia for having me. Kuya Nico, of course. Dahil na-mention daw ako ni Kuya Nico kasi na nag-bike ako, kaya nandito ako ngayon with him. And ayun, I learned a lot from the speakers also kasi kanina nakikinig din ako kay Coach Sol and Rebecca. And ayan, lalo na kay Kuya Nico. It's really an honor to be with him dito sa webinar na to. And ayun, sobrang dami ko natutunan. Thank you so much.
Maraming salamat, Miss Eya Laure. Eya, stay with us here. Thank you. Pakinggan natin yung message ni Nico and really hope that we could have that chikahan pace bike ride, okay? Sana hindi antukin sa atin si Nico doon when he rides with us. Sama din natin yung mga kaibigan natin from Gatorade, sila Miss Marcia, sila Sir Mikey, si Miss Melay. Di pa pwede. Kailangan mga anak muna yon bago makasama sa atin. Nico, your message sa ating mga viewers. Go ahead, Nico Welgas.
Thank you for having me, guys. Thank you, Eya. Idol ko rin to sa volleyball. Sobrang galing niya mag-volleyball. Taas ng IQ levels. So, thanks for falling in love with cycling. I hope you keep biking. Shoutout sa aking national triathlon teammate, 3-time SEA Games gold medalist, si King Mang Grobang. She's here supporting the webinar. I'd like to thank the whole Gatorade family, to all the viewers, and I hope you learned something from this event. Never stop learning, never stop cycling with friends. It's the greatest sport in the world, they say. Kasi it's a social sport, it bonds the old friends and family, it makes you stay fit, makes you be away from the doctor and medical bills. And above all, stay hydrated, stay drinking Gatorade. Thank you.
Love the message, mga kapatid. The virtual round of applause for our guest athletes sa second part ng ating programa, Miss Eya Laure, and of course, Mr. Nico Huelgas. Guys, maraming salamat sa inyo. And that's how we end our GSSI Webinar Series 2021. Episode 1 pa lang po yan, no? All about cycling. Yung mga beginners yan, sana marami kayong natutunan. And as mentioned, don't forget, mark your calendars, July 15 po, yung ating second episode, 2 weeks from now. It's training at home. At sa ngalan po ng, yan po, Training at Home, July 15, 4 p.m. Special guest as mentioned, we got Coach Kale Alvarez, Dr. Liam Brown is there, and of course, Cole Anthony of the Orlando Magic. At sa ngalan po ng bumubuo ng aming GSSI Webinar Series 2021, kasama sila Miss Marcia, si Miss Melay, si Sir Mikey. Maraming salamat po. Ako po si Chicky Reyes. Nagsasabi po sa inyong thank you for watching the show. Stay safe, stay healthy, drink your Gatorade because nothing beats Gatorade. And we'll see you all on July 15. Bye, guys.